Most mix engineers believe that the snare drum is the second most important element of the mix after the vocals in any genre. Now, that's debatable, but we're not going to go into that. Today, we're just going to be looking at how to achieve fat, present snare drum sounds in your mixes, and that's what's coming up. Hey, I'm Akurios and I'm back again with another audio tutorial this Friday, and we're continuing the series we began last week on mixing fat drum sounds. And today we're going to be talking about the snare, and I'm going to make it snappy. I'm just going to show you exactly what I did to achieve the snare drum sound that we have in this mix. If you're seeing me for the very first time, I'm a musician, a music producer, an audio engineer, a voice coach, a music educator, and an entrepreneur. And I'm here to help musicians find the courage to pursue a music career and earn a living in the process while improving and advancing their talents and gifts. So if you're interested in sharpening your music business skills, becoming a better vocalist, or learning tips and tricks on music production and audio engineering, then go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so that you're notified when there's new content on this channel. Now let's go in and see what's going on in this snare. All right, now once again, I'm just going to solo the entire drum mix, and we'll have a listen. Well, let's listen first of all to a section of the music and pay attention to the drums so that you can hear what exactly is going on in the drum sound, how they sound, and what we did.
Oh, I lift you higher, high, high, high. I gotta worry more as an member. I lift you high, high, high. It's sing and do more. On and he can. I bless you.
Okay, so let's solo the drums, or before that I can just give you a quick update, a rundown of exactly what's going on here. So we have, of course, kick, snare, hi-hats, tom 1, tom 2, tom 3, tom 4, and then a tom group that has some processing on it, which we're going to look into when we're dealing with the toms in the next video. And then we're going to look also at the overheads. There's the overhead channel, there's the room channel, room 1, room 2. And I explained last week that these two room tracks sound differently. And just looking at the wave files, not that you should form a habit of looking at wave files, but just looking at the wave files alone, you know they are different. All right, and we're going to look into that deeply later on. But those are the drum tracks that we have. And if I solo them, just the drum tracks, down to the room track, that's here. Now you can hear, talking about the snare is snappy and very, very cracky. It's cracking and in your face, it's present, it's quite consistent also. And that's one of the things, some of the things I was looking at achieving in this particular mix, because the song is a type of song that should be driven by the drums, by the percussions. So I wanted the kick and the snare to be very, very in your face, for want of a better term. So let's listen to that one more time and let's see if you can pick out some of the things I've just mentioned. So you want that crack, you want that fatness. It's fat, at the same time it cracks. It's present in the mix and it's consistent at the same time. You don't have some notes falling off and being difficult to hear, and then some all over the place and almost blasting through your speakers. Now, you want a consistent sound that is cracking, that is present, that is punchy, and that's what we have here. So let's look at the processing that I have going on here. So first of all, on the snare track, the snare channel, that has the basic initial processing or the most direct processing on the channel, this is what we have. Again, we have a Slate Digital virtual mix rack, and we can see what is going on here. So we have, first of all, FG73, which is just a preamp. I like to use preamps on my drums on most channels, actually, most elements of my mixes. I like the Slate version of this particular EQ of this Neve preamp, sorry, the FG73. I love the sound it has. I love the saturation. I love the contribution it makes to vocals, bass, drums. And here we have the drive a little over 50%. And then the trim is around there also. We can see it's at +2, +2.07. And then there's an EQ, an FGA, similar to the processing on the kick drum. If you saw last week's video, and I'm going to link, I'm going to attach a link to that particular video in the description of this particular video, of this same video you're watching now. So later on, you can actually go and watch that video on the kick drum, on mixing the fat kick drum. All right, now let's see what's happening here. First of all, I have a boost at 200 because we know that the 200 hertz range has a fundamental of the snare drum. Most snare drums have a fundamental at 200, and it gives that fat, rich, low-end sound of the snare drum. Boosting that is cool. And then we have, of course, 400 hertz. Between 300 and 400 hertz, there's this boxiness, this honkiness that drums usually have. And I'm going to play it to you so that you can hear what exactly is going on. We're not just cutting out frequencies or boosting frequencies because we heard somewhere that it's nice to boost those frequencies or it's nice to cut out those frequencies. If we solo this, now I'm going to boost that 400 hertz so you hear. I apologize for the unpleasantness of that sound in case your headphones were too loud, and I hope you're listening with headphones or good speakers so you can hear exactly what is going on, or a decent representation of what I'm doing. All right, listen with headphones or studio monitors. Okay, so you can hear actually very clearly that that is not a pleasant sound. That's why it was cut out. And then we have 1.5 kilohertz boost, just 2 dBs to ensure that we have that crack, we have the snap, we have the pokiness of the snare drum punching through the mix. And then we have a boost at the high end. 10 kilohertz is boosted by about 6 dBs. And then we have, of course, the compressor, FG Stress, an emulation of the distressor, the famous distressor, a legend of a machine. And then what we're doing here is that we have the input around 6, and then the attack is at 10 because I wanted the attack to be very slow, as slow as possible. The release is around 4, which is not too fast and not too slow, just around the middle. And the output is at 6.5. Okay, and then we have the mix all the way because I want all the compression happening on this particular signal. And then lastly, we have this revival plugin, which is a saturation plugin. Okay, so let's listen to what that is doing as a whole. Bypass. Active. Okay, the first thing you will notice is that there's more volume. There's more volume, and that's because, of course, there's compression and there are a couple of boosts going on in the EQs and, of course, the saturation. So the signal has become louder. which is very common with my mixes when I apply processing on them. Okay, so now something else that is going on here is a reverb. I'm sending a small amount of the snare to a reverb. It's an Abbey Roads chamber, I believe. Abbey Roads chamber plugin from Slate. Let's get to that very quickly. And that's my reverb 2. And what I'm doing here is simple. Of course, I'm just using the plate selector A, and then I'm not using any pre-delay because I don't want any pre-delay in this particular reverb. And then the drive is just a tiny little bit of that. And the dry wet mix, of course, is 100% wet because I'm using a send. And I've explained why I use sends for reverbs, delays, and all that, because I can now control the amount of that particular signal I'm sending to the processor. Okay, and then the analog sound is all the way, and that's basically it. So that's the sound of the reverb. So if I go back to my snare drum and decide to mute the reverb, now take note, there's something else I'm doing on that reverb channel, and that is an EQ. Now, this EQ is very simple. It's just a low shelf and a high shelf. We have, of course, the low shelf around 100 and, excuse me, this is the wrong channel. Okay, this is the EQ right here, reverb 2. We have the low shelf around 170 hertz, just pulling out all the low end because we don't want to reverberate the low end. That is going to introduce a lot of muddiness and cloudiness in the sound. So we don't want the reverb of the low end that we're trying to cut out. We just want the purest and the most fundamental sound of the snare drum being reverberated. And then there's also a high shelf, and this technique is known as the Abbey Roads technique, which is just rolling off the low end or some low end and some high end after you've applied the reverb on the element. And that's what we have here. And the high end roll off, or the high end shelf, is around 6.2 kilohertz, and it's not too drastic. You can see the slope is gentle, and I believe the Q's are at 7 actually for that, and that looks like a 6 dB per octave, while this looks like something more. Okay, so let's go back to the snare drum and see what's happening and what the bus processing on the snare, on the drum group, is doing to the snare. All right, now on the drum group, what we have, if you remember from last week's video on the kick drum, is just the SSL compressor, the bus compressor from SSL from Waves, and this is what is going on. All right, now let's look into what the individual processors in the VMR are doing one after the other. Okay, now let's bypass the drum bus, of course, bypass the reverb first of all, and bypass the drum bus. So we see the raw sound, we can hear the raw sound of the snare. Okay, so let's bring in the processors one after the other. So I'm just going to bypass all of them. not doing too much, very subtle saturation and presence. And then the EQ. And then the compressor. You can see it's introducing some fatness, some weight, some heft to the drum sound, and it's helping with controlling the entire sound, bringing it together so it's more compact and heavy, sounding as one. Because if you listen closely, you can hear that there's a side stick sound. There's a side stick sound also in the snare drum. And even when the signal is snappier, it sounds a little different from when we have more snare in the actual hit of the snare drum. So that helps to tidy all that up a bit. This compressor helps to tidy all that up a bit. Let's listen to it one more time. All right, now let's listen to the Revival, the exciter saturation plugin right here. And that's the very last processor in this particular chain. So it's introducing more heft and more presence, more weight to the snare drum sound, because we have more saturation in the low end. The thickness has more gain on it. This is at 15 or thereabout. And then we have this just at the high end, which is the shimmer, around 8. Okay. Yeah, that's 8.5, and thickness is at 15.2. All right, now that's at the channel level, and then we bring in the reverb, of course, and the bus processing, the compressor, and this is the final sound of the snare drum. And if we put it in the mix so we can hear everything in context. So I'll just take out the reverb and some of the processing so that you hear what that is doing in the mix. We'll start with the main processing, or we'll start with the reverb. Very subtle sense of space that it introduces to the snare drum sound. Right now, let's bypass the main processing on the channel, on the snare channel, and hear what that does. Yep, that's the sound we want. Okay, so The boss processing obviously introduces more weight and more presence to the snare sound. But I'm interested in what the overheads is contributing to the snare sound. So let's listen to that in solo first of all. Now with the overheads. And that's the sound of the snare. Okay, now let's listen to another section of the music so that we can hear a different sound from the snare drum.
Everything turns around. Tell me why you won't lift your head to the one who saves completely. Tell me why your hands won't be raised to the one who lives in the light. Join and lift Jesus high. Higher, higher, Lord, my mighty healer. You are the good King that does good to me.
So basically that's what we have in the snare mix. It's nothing too complex, simple EQ, compression, saturation, bus processing, and then reverb. Nothing too complex. So you try it out. Let me hear what you achieve from your own snare mixes. Let me hear your idea of mixing a snare. I'll be glad to get back to you on that, and that would be amazing. And if you like the video, tap the like button, give me a thumbs up, and feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about the hi-hats, and we'll also talk about the toms later on. Also take out time to practice these things so that you become a better mix engineer. Remember, this thing is practical. You don't become better by just watching videos. You become better by practicing the things that you watch on videos like these. So take this video, take all the lessons that you've learned from it, and practice, apply it in your own mixes, and I want to hear about that. So from me here at Silum 7 Music Studio, I'm Akurios, and I'll see you next time.
Everything turns around.